recording. We are officially recording. And the puppy's waking up. I'm going to take her and put her away. Be right back. All right, here we go. In 3. And 2. And I don't really want that in there. Still sound good, Frank?
Yep.
Sound good? All right, here we go.
Yep.
We are recording, starting at 1 minute. Thanks for joining us today. If you are a pastor, that's hilarious. All right, there it is. I couldn't find my play button. Let's try that again. Starting at 1 minute and 15 seconds. Thanks for joining us today. This is our 3rd video, and we hope that you're receiving this well. If you're a pastor of a growing church or ministry, this information that we are about to give you is going to be invaluable. Or if you're just getting started in business or church planning or starting a ministry, we hope you'll look back to this day and really be thankful and hoping that you did not miss this. Today, we are talking about right people, right roles. Right people, right path. My name is Scott Mueller, and I'm from a company called 30Pastors. I'm the business development manager and lead moderator for 30Pastors. I'm very excited today, and I'm inspired about what we're up to. We have an expert in organizational consulting, my friend and former colleague, Frank Heegard. Frank, welcome to the show.
Great to be here, Scott.
Frank, you and I both have a very similar passion, not only to help businesses, but to help churches as well. And this is one of my favorite topics of discussion. We've talked about it for a long time. It's about people, it's about coaching, it's about consulting, and more than anything, it's about transforming our churches and businesses alike.
Absolutely, Scott. I have a similar passion. We've all been a part of churches, and we know that it all starts with the leadership. It all starts with who is leading those organizations.
That's right, Frank. Frank, you're an expert at putting the right people in the right roles, and that's in all types of organizations. But today we're specifically going to talk about how this applies to churches and ministries and how it applies just like it does to businesses. So, Frank, thanks again for joining us. This is a true honor and blessing.
My pleasure, Scott. Thank you.
Frank, if you could, please tell us, tell our audience, we hear this buzzword right now, consultant. It's been going around for about 10 years, but the newest part of that is organizational consultant. Tell us what you do and why you're different from other types of consultants.
Absolutely. Scott, what I do is I become very involved with the organization and have a deep understanding of really what's driving the organization, each from a person per person basis, as well as from a departmental basis and a leadership basis. And so having this insight objectively, I'm able to show where there might be gaps and opportunities for organizations to move forward.
Got it. And you specifically most of the time deal with people pains. Is that correct?
Absolutely, yes. Organizational would be with all of the people in the organization, especially in ministry. As you know, your product as well as your process is really people. In a manufacturing company, you have a process, which actually might be steps, and then there's some sort of task that's done, and you're dealing with a certain widget. But here in ministry, organizational consulting actually becomes more intense because it's all about the people, both the quote-unquote product as well as how we get through the process has all to do with people. So that's what organizational consulting is. How do we help people work together and work better to achieve their goals?
That's awesome. What do you think, Frank? We've talked a little bit about this again behind the scenes, but what do you think personally the number one people problem is currently?
What I run into more than anything else, Scott, is a lack of self-awareness. And that comes down to every individual. But the weight really, again, falls back on the leadership. Not only does the leadership have to have a clear understanding that they are not defined by their title or their tenure, but they're really defined by who they are. And 99% of the time, if an individual has a deep self-awareness, their ability to have an awareness of others is exponentially better.
Got it. So, how do you, with what you do and the tools you have, how do you teach a pastor or how do you get a pastor to see really who they are authentically? We talked about that a little bit with my worship leading expert and with my transformational leading expert, both over the past couple of days. And I'm going to ask you that same thing is how do we get them to be authentic and to be authentic with their self-awareness? So how do you do that specifically as who you are as a consultant?
Uh, Great question, Scott. In many ways, consultants are like a mirror. They really are like a mirror for other people to. And as a consultant, I'm not there to tell you how to run your organization or tell you how to do your job, but I'm there to be a mirror. And when you're laid bare and there's nothing to hide from the doctor, it can be a little uncomfortable sometimes. So I build a deep trust with my clients, and then I hold up the mirror, and I help them understand what's in the mirror. I help them understand what I see and what is there, so that they can better understand themselves. And so it's a process. And so one of the ways that, again, you asked, how do I do that? There has to be a willingness and a reciprocal relationship in this process. But my insights, I'm able to show them how a better understanding of the drivers they have, my better understanding of those drivers helps there be a much better self-awareness for this individual, and that's great. It's something to embrace, so that you don't have an over expectation of yourself or an under expectation.
Yeah, because we all have strengths and weaknesses. And what we teach as coaches on the coaching side is that our strengths can be our weaknesses and our weaknesses can flow into our strengths. So tell me a little bit about your tool that you like to use, which is Culture Index. That's part of what you do, and a small part, but it is what you do use that inside of self awareness as well, correct?
Yes, absolutely.
And how does that work?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're able to measure the drivers that each person has. And so in understanding that, really, many times people do understand a lot about themselves, especially if they've been married and they have kids. You have a lot of people around you capable of being mirrors into your life. But when you have a tool that brings vocabulary and specific data to the inherent traits that are inside you that are driving not all, but much of the behavior that other people see, now you can see where you start and where you finish. In other words, where a trait becomes a strength and then where that trait can become a weakness. And knowing where that starts and stops, it means everything when it comes to self-awareness.
And those traits are things like head, heart, gut. Those traits are things like competition. Those traits are things like patience. Is that about what we're talking about?
A variety of different traits. And one trait that everyone's familiar with is extraversion and introversion.
That's right.
That's a very common trait, and we tend to sometimes people think there's really just two kinds of people in the world, extroverts and introverts. Um, but that's not the case. That trait is actually functioning inside of a whole system of other traits, and to simplify that trait down to strictly someone who likes to talk and have fun would be a disservice. Even though that is a true statement for an extrovert, there's so much more to it. And the insight just helps you become a better student of people and therefore a better leader and manager of people.
And you guys also break up, which is what we're going to flow into next, is you also break up the difference between gut decisions, logical decisions, and heart decisions. So logic versus heart. And I think that flows us into a pretty good segue of what can you tell me? So the hiring process is difficult in a business, but I think it's very difficult in a church as well. And I see most churches, and this is just where I've been involved, doing a lot of hiring from the heart or from the gut. And how do you think this process really works?
Well, I think most our listeners have probably have some examples of that. They hired a friend, a family member, someone they liked, someone who was like
Right.
them. Um, and what happens there oftentimes, there hasn't been a real thought process on what is actually required to do the job. Sometimes pastors, having worn so many hats, many pastors come up through the ranks, right? They're going to be involved in an associate pastor position of some sort, possibly youth ministry or associate pastor, and then they're going to move into a senior pastoral role. And it's easy with that kind of experience behind you to take for granted what might be necessary in a job. And therefore, hey, you're a trustworthy person who will die for the cause. You're very passionate. I believe, for some reason, that you can do this. I can't tell you how many times that backfires. And when it does, it's one of the hardest situations to be in, to have to change that decision with someone who you're very close with.
So it really does come down to, with you guys as a consultant, with the consultants in general, organizational development consultants, you guys have the opportunity to see the data and to head off some of those monsters as they come forth. Is that correct?
That would be our goal. Yes, get involved early on, because none of us, and here's one of the biggest struggles in corporate America as well as in ministry. These leaders, phenomenal leaders, educational leaders, visionary leaders, different types of leaders, are now asked to create a very dynamic organization, org chart, let's say, and make these decisions. And when did they go over that in seminary? When did they go over that in business school when you got your MBA? And even if they did, it's probably pretty conceptual, and most of the time it's putting out fires. It's a reactionary, hey, if this happens, you need to do this if you're the leader. Let's take a different approach. Let's get ahead of this. Let's give our pastors and our leadership a shot in the arm, give them some leverage, and give them some assistance to get ahead of this, because life's too short to wait 10 years till someone decides to move on. And it's very difficult to reverse decisions in a non-profit ministry setting.
Yeah, I got it for sure. I get it. Well, churches and other organizations have also come up with other processes. The old school is get a resume, do an interview, hire from the heart, hire from the gut. Now it's evolving, in my opinion, even worse. My wife just went to an interview where she had to be interviewed by the entire office. And pastors have to go through this where they're hired by a whole staff of people put together. Uh, they call them pastor search teams or whatever, deacon search teams, pastor search teams. What do you think about this process versus maybe what you would suggest?
Absolutely. So when you ask this process versus what I do, Scott, I'm going to respond like this. I wouldn't use the word versus, just to be honest with you. I would actually say there's a convergence and a dovetailing of these different aspects and parts of the process. Everything you mentioned is helpful, and it really illustrates the fact that people want to make the right decision. They want other people involved to make the best decision because the last one blew up in their face or the last one caused some pain. So they're trying to what? What are they doing? We're trying to objectify our decisions to make sure it really works, that if A plus B equals C, I'm going to interview this person and see if they have A plus B. The one weakness I might find there that is more in between the lines of what you just said would be this. Did anybody ever really sit down and ask what kind of person will excel in this position? So before we even start the process of like, hey, we got a bunch of people to talk to or interview, let's create a target. And then compare people to what we know we need and stick with it.
So you being a part of that process, or an organizational development consultant being a part of that process and having the tool at hand to show strength and weaknesses, building the process before you start to have the conversations is the key.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay.
Absolutely.
And then what about this philosophy that I've heard, hire slow and fire fast? What do you think about this?
Well, I think that's a great philosophy and a great value to have. We don't get ahead of these decisions. They're reactionary. And we tend to make decisions with someone we know because we trust them. Well, that's kind of normal, right? If you're going to go invest time and money into someone and you're going to hope you need something to get done, you're going to go with someone you trust. But it's reactionary. And we tend to react and make those decisions quickly. So there really needs to be some more upfront investment of time and energy. And that's why we would say hire slow, because you really want to evaluate and try to get to the bottom of things before you have to reverse that decision.
And many times, so I'm trying to flow with you on this, is so in the process, hiring slow, firing quickly. So we'll just say hiring slow for this process. Part of it is many times we're putting it out there. We need a small groups pastor, or we need a youth pastor, but we're not looking at the personality traits that go with that. And so formulating those ahead of time, again, is part of what you guys do. You look at not just what the training is that somebody needs. We need somebody out of seminary for this position, but for this one over here in technology, we don't necessarily need that type of training. So many times we look at training versus personality. Am I right in saying that you're more personality driven, strengths and weaknesses driven versus training?
Absolutely.
Bless you.
Yes, absolutely. No, thank you. So absolutely, Scott. We come out of school, we come out of seminary, and it's easy to measure what you know. It's easy to measure some things you can do. And it's easy to tell you what we need you to do. But I still don't know who you are. I just still don't know how you make decisions. I just still don't know how you go about your work. And since you're a very unique creature and you're a unique creation of God, how did God make you? And so that type of insight is something that very few people care to really invest their mental energy in. And we're an educationally based program where we really want people to understand people through our data. And so we do not have a simple cliff note on this. We have a whole educational process to become masters of how people are wired.
And that is perfect, because I think personally, Frank, as we work together at Culture Index, and I think Culture Index is one of the best personality tools in the industry. And there's a lot of churches using a lot of fancy tools. What is your thought process about these tools, and are they necessary? And if so, where do you go with it? Where do you start? Where do you end up in the process?
Yeah, there is a lot out there, Scott, and frankly, there's a lot of decent tools out there. There's a lot of confusion out there as well. There's a whole lot of confusion out there because of really the same terminology being used to measure different things. So what we find out in the workplace and with these assessments and different tools that are out there is that many times traits are are mixed with behaviors, and then the results are determined through behaviors. And we don't even know if we're measuring behaviors or traits. Two very different things. So the priority would be this. Find something that is reliable and clear when it comes to the information it provides you, and then invest the time to become a master yourself at that particular database. It's, in other words, don't rely strictly on someone else's regurgitation, very much like interpretation of the Bible. Like, I can read you a commentary, or I can get in there and actually experience it myself and deliver on Sunday what I came up with. Culture Index is designed for each person to really own the data, own the material, so that it isn't regurgitated.
I like it, Frank. And here's what I'm noticing. I kind of lost my place a little bit in where we're at, but what I've noticed is here's where it helped me. So I was with Culture Index about 3 or 4 years ago, and where it really helped me in the other positions that I've held as a general manager of a company and as what I do now and teach people, is it teaches me, using these tools teaches me how to ask the questions, not to get the answers that I want, but how to ask the questions so that I get the answers that I need.
Sure.
And so that's what you teach people. That's what we teach people. And I'm going to pause it there for a second, Frank, and we'll edit part of this out because I lost my spot. I hit the wrong button. So talk about opportunities. We're at 21 minutes, so we do have a little bit more time. Just so you know, we'll edit this part out. We're at 12:01, so you tell me if you want to stop for the day, and or we'll finish out and just see how the end process goes. It's your choice.
Well, if it is my choice, I'd probably stop today.
Okay, great.
And then I'll review this. I do know, I mean,